So, the very first thing, there's actually three things I really want to get into right off the bat, but the very first thing is the most important. I put considerable thought for reasons I will go into later and not even mention this, but in this case I think it is warranted. So, for those of you who have not seen me or know nothing about me, I have what I call a war on spoilers. That means no accidental spoilers, and I do stress the word accidental. That means if you put in a spoiler or spoilers into your comments on this channel, you will be banned permanently without hesitation or question. This is a line in the sand. I am absolute on this matter, okay? I will explain a little bit why later, but I just want to get that right out there right off the bat. If you really want to discuss this movie in a spoilerific fashion, feel free to do so on the Google groups. As long as there's a spoiler tag, feel free to message me if you have something you want to say, etc., etc. But do not just put it out there in the open for anyone to casually see without meaning to. Speaking as someone who has had this specific movie ruined, thanks to spoilers, and has seen other movies ruined, including one a friend of mine finally got around to watching recently. That was completely ruined, thanks to spoilers. Well, let's just say I don't even really feel the need to really explain myself on this matter. I will do so a little bit later, when I talk about the concept of spoilers in general. But for now, please, can we just be civilized about this? Now, this is not a full rumination. The reason for that is actually very simple. I am tired, I am in pain, and my brain does not work as well as it should. And in fact, it is very warm right now, which just kind of adds to that. But I did kind of want to record this before it got too late. I genuinely hope this doesn't go on too long because I am literally already starting to sweat. However, for those of you who have not been following me, I am getting better health-wise, but as a consequence of that, I am finally able to sleep because my pain has gone down significantly. And that means my body is now craving about 18 to 20 hours of sleep a day. So, yeah, I am very tired, and that affects my brain, and that is why this is not a full rumination, why there will be no full ruminations until I am truly better. If anybody is wondering why I am not on webcam, you also are probably someone who has not been keeping up with things. That's fine. I look terrible. I refuse to be seen like this. The end. I'm sure most of you don't care. All you'd see is me gesticulating like I normally do anyways. So I decided to put up one of my little slightly custom logos up there, the one-winged nobody, which is actually the shirt I'm wearing right now. I have a shirt with that design on it. Now, this is my first movie pseudo-rumination. This is my first look at a movie. Although, I really should rephrase that. This is the first time I've sat down and actually recorded a look at a movie. I actually had done quite a bit of background material and work for several other movies I was going to look at. About 10 of them, actually. Now, given the context of what I'm looking at right now, and anybody out there who can think about that number for about I don't know, 3 seconds, probably can guess what 10 movies it was I was going to look at. I was actually going to do a break and do a movie basically in between each season of my Voyager ruminations. You're probably wondering why that never happened. I got about 5 comments total. Yes, only 5. But I did get 5. I shouldn't say comments. I got 5 messages. You know, some were comments, some were private messages through YouTube, basically telling me that I was boring, disinteresting, and a hack, that I was just aping sci-fi debris, and that there was no reason for my videos to exist. Now, those of you who know me at all probably know I took that a little harder than I should have. I do not have a huge amount of self-confidence to begin with, and it it's not hard for someone like me, especially when I'm already not doing well, to look at something like that and be like, oh, well, okay, I guess I'll just kind of not do that. So I canceled those movie plans basically because of that. I don't know if I will ever do them again. That was several months ago that I had all the material ready to go. But in truth, you may not like what I have to say about this movie. You may not like me just sitting here talking about this movie. You may accuse me of whatever. But I have decided I am no longer going to be afraid of failure on this matter, if for absolutely no other reason than because that's not really me when it comes down to it. Now, let's talk about the damn movie, Star Trek Into Darkness. I am going to be talking in non-spoiler terms up until a certain point, which will be incredibly obvious, and then I will start talking about the movie freely, as if you have already seen it or do not care. This is pretty standard for me for anything I consider, spoiler heavy. The Kingdom Hearts series will be another good example of this when I finally get to it. So let's talk about this movie. Now, everything I'm about to say is probably going to sound like a negative, mostly because it is. It is my opinion that one of the larger failures, I'd say the third big, well, this is kind of this is an umbrella failure of this movie. It fails to utilize Star Trek precepts, concepts, mentality. Star Trek has always had a certain flavor to it, and it's hard to define it in more literal, concrete terms than that, because that really is what it comes down to. There is a tonality towards Star Trek. There is a mentality. There is an emotion to it. There is something that it invokes within people. Most people, when one of the more summarized depictions I've ever heard of Star Trek was a lighthearted show about life in space. Now, that could be argued to hell and back, and has been. I mean, Trekkers and Trekkies are one of the most divisive audiences I've ever seen in my life, and just disagree on everything, about everything. But, at the end of the day, one thing I have found true in all my decades of being a fan of Star Trek is that we all like Star Trek. We may not like an episode, we may not like a character. That person may like this character, that person may not. This person may be indecisive, this person may not care. But at the end of the day, we all look at Star Trek and we say, yeah. Or if you prefer, hell yeah. Because it's Star Trek. Star Trek did a lot for speculative fiction in general. I'd say probably right up there with Doctor Who and Star Wars as far as major proponents in the most modern era of science fiction and speculative fiction in general. That is my opinion, of course. But one of the truly important things, and this, forgive me for roaming just a little bit, is that there is always that tone to Star Trek. Now, let us make this absolutely clear. I am not saying that trying new things is bad. That's stupid. I am not saying that trying to branch out or be, to try different things, to endeavor to reach out and be like, okay, let's try this instead, is a bad idea. That's stupid. I am not saying that. What I am saying is that, in my frank opinion, if you are going to have something that is part of an ongoing series, a franchise, you take the core elements, the true core, after you've sat the thing in the crucible and burned everything else away. What is the core element of that franchise? And said, okay, we've got the core, let's work from there. Even some of the more darker aspects of Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, for most of its run, comes to mind. In the Pale Moonlight, the deals with Section 31. Even in some of the more horrific aspects of Star Trek, let's be frank, Star Trek has been pretty horrific sometimes. The Davidians of Time's Arrow, the Borg. Think about what assimilation really means for a second. Just genuinely, just stop right now and look at that completely generic, bland word and try to imagine being physically and mentally raped, mind-controlled, and brutalized. Because that is what assimilation really is. Forgive me for using the R word. I don't like to use that word, but I use it specifically to get across the impact. Star Trek is not just light and fluffy. I despise anybody who uses that argument. Yes, it is a lighthearted show about life in space, definitely. But anybody who says it's all about, life is perfect, is an idiot. I'm sorry, there it is. You do not have to be, in order to keep the core principles of Star Trek in your setting, in your series, in your show, in your movie, whatever. Not necessary. Star Trek Into Darkness fails on this most basic precept. It does not feel like Star Trek at all. It feels like a science fiction action adventure movie. It does. A reasonably competent one, even, for that matter. But not a single point of this entire movie felt like a Star Trek movie. That's the umbrella failure. Let's start talking about specifics, okay? Now, before anybody starts crawling up me and being like, oh my god, you're just a stupid Trekker, or Trekkie, depending on your preference, because the two have kind of been having this whole thing going on since the original series. I'm going to stop now. There is nothing wrong with a good action flick. I am someone who has gone on record as defending Die Hard 4, for God's sakes. By the way, I am a network engineer, and I defended Die Hard 4. Do I really need to keep going with that sentence? There is nothing wrong with a good action flick. That's fun. That's enjoyable to watch. And indeed, in all honesty, that's probably most of the reason why I did actually go ahead and watch this movie and enjoy a decent amount of it. The action was actually quite good. It was interesting. It was high-paced. They managed to keep a pretty much action-oriented flow for, I'd say, about 80% of the movie, and that's actually kind of hard to pull off. It did get a little tiring towards the end because the pace never really let off, except for a few key scenes. I'll talk about that later. But overall, it was well done, and the soundtrack really helps emphasize the movie. Those of you who know me know that music is a hugely important thing to me. So I freely admit that the music of a movie will definitively affect my opinion of that movie, or of that game, or of that television show. So the good music definitely did highlight it. Awesome. So that's really all I wanted to say here. There's nothing wrong with an action flick. It was a good action flick, good action sci-fi flick even, and I'm with that. I'm not going to talk about the effects because there's really nothing to say about effects these days. I'll be completely honest. I think I've just gotten too jaded, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this. Nowadays, the effects I tend to notice are the ones that are not CGI. Iron Man 3 comes to mind immediately, and other similar like things. So, yeah, that's just me. Anyways, moving along. I'm only going to talk about this briefly because this is mostly spoiler territory, but I am very disappointed in the general lack of characterization and character development. The woman, forgive me, I don't really know the actors' names right now, especially right now. I mean, I don't have a good memory for names normally. But the woman who played Uhura did actually a very fantastic job. Very much props to her for actually pulling off a good, solid female primary character. You know, I wouldn't call her a lead, which is almost a shame because maybe she should have been the lead. Captain Uhura would certainly have been interesting. But nevertheless, she actually did a very competent job, very excellent job. Cumberbatch, I believe is his name, the gentleman who played John Harrison. He was, of course, excellent. That's not really a surprise to anybody, of course, going into this. And the guy who played Spock, of course, was good. And the guy who played Scotty, I'm sorry, I can't think of any of those. Simon Pegg, I believe, is the guy who plays Scotty. But in any case, all of these individuals did good acting jobs. That's actually not what I'm complaining about. I just said that because I really want to emphasize this, okay? The acting was not my problem. The lack of chemistry and the lack of development and the lack of general characterization is my problem. Kirk, okay, it's been a bit since the first movie. Oh no, spoiler alert. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, some time has passed since the first movie. Duh, right? Ergo, there should have been at least some development of this crew as a family. In fact, that is one of the themes of the film, is that this crew is Kirk's family, but it never feels that way. Kirk, only in one scene, one brilliant, beautiful scene, by the way, hands down, that one scene accepted, Kirk never actually feels like he really cares that much. And it never really feels like they are a family. They're the camaraderie that the old series had, that the Next Generation had, that Deep Space Nine had, even Voyager, the cast members. I'm going to talk about this when I get back to Voyager a bit, because someone was bringing it up recently. But of all these shows, there was an obvious camaraderie, not just amongst the characters, but amongst the cast. And it's just lacking here. It is acceptable and excusable. Indeed, I'm sure most people, myself included, barely even noticed it in the last movie because this was the first time the characters were meeting. But by the time you get to the second movie, that's the point in which you're supposed to have gotten used to each other, both as actors and as characters. And it was very severely lacking. Next point, lack of development. I'm sorry, no, lack of characterization, I guess would be the better way. Whatever, the other point. I'm sorry, I really am. Wow, I'm starting to sweat really badly here. I'm not even to the spoiler section yet. None of the characters feel like they moved at all. This is kind of tied into the previous point, but what I mean by that is their character arcs are not there at all, or are the same arcs they had in the previous movie. Now I'm going to talk about this with regard to Star Trek as a whole. I mentioned the precepts, right? One thing I think that 99.9% of all people who enjoy Star Trek can all agree on, all of us. I may be overstepping my bounds with this. Forgive me if you disagree with me. But what I believe that the vast majority of us all can agree on is that Star Trek is about people. It is about strong character focus, character development, characterization, character growth, character arcs, all of it. All the way back to the original series, if you want to argue that, in all of the movies, with two exceptions. Even the cancelled pilot, which they brought back for the Menagerie, I am referring to, of course, The Cage. Character focus. Most people would not even argue this against me for even a second, and that's because most people watched The Next Generation. Let's be frank. The Next Generation really, really succeeded, not because of its excellent scripting or its excellent cast, although that certainly was... I'm sorry, not because of its excellent scripting, not because of excellent effects, not because of excellent directing, but because the cast really was amazing and because it was really well focused on the characters. That is, I'll talk about this more when I get to TNG, but it is my frank opinion that the reason TNG survived to get to be the amazing show we all love, because, you know, Season 1 and Season 2 both had serious issues, is because of the character focus and because the cast was able to pull that off. I talked about this just a few minutes ago. There was amazing chemistry between the people, even early on. Jonathan Frakes is a great example of that. But anyways, I'm derailing just a little bit. But let me really, really pull out two examples I just feel like doing. Best of both worlds, okay? In the best of both worlds, we have the Borg. The Borg! Okay? And yet, even those episodes, most especially the first one, was very character-focused. Almost entirely, almost to the point of exclusion on on Riker and on Shelby. Mostly on Riker, though. Shelby was mostly there to highlight Riker. That was Riker's story. Having that character focus, having that characterization is part of why Best of Both Worlds was so amazing. Yes, dread. Yes, horror. Yes, beautiful soundtrack. Yes, the Borg. But if you had taken away all of that character focus, all of that characterization, all of that amazing development of Riker as a character, Best of Both Worlds would have suffered for it. In the Pale Moonlight, Deep Space Nine, I know there's a lot of Trek fans out there who hate this episode, and I understand most of the reasons I have heard. I have heard people give genuine, logical reasons why they don't like this episode, and I can agree with their reasoning. I don't agree with their outcome. I love that episode. It's probably one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek in general. But, one way or another, this is an episode about altering the fate of the entire setting. Now, please try and keep in mind that we are talking about a setting that spans about, a quarter of a galaxy. At least in the majority. Obviously, there's other stuff, but you get the point, right? This is not a small chunk of real estate that is being altered permanently. This is the kind of thing that really... And Deep Space Nine was the kind of show that was willing to do that sort of thing. Willing to actually alter the fate of the setting, not just the show. TNG did this as well on more than one occasion. Again, the Borg. But you get my point, right? This is an episode where the stakes were basically as high as they tend to get without... With some exceptions. I mean, obviously the stakes have been higher. But I'm just emphasizing this because in this episode where they're dealing with war and the possibility of being conquered without probability of success, with multi-billion casualties, in this horrible, grandiose scale, it was still about the characters. It was still about the individuals. It was still character focused. It was still... You get where I'm going with this? Hang on just a second. Sorry. Even when I'm doing this, I cannot avoid being interrupted. But yeah, that whole episode was still very, very, very much about Cisco and very much about Garrick. And hell, there were even some tidbits about other characters. Quark actually had a really good character scene, and so did I can't even think of his name all of a sudden. The damn doctor, Bashir. Thank you. I'm sure several of you out there were like, Bashir, you moron. Anyways, I am just emphasizing these to get across the point that even when Star Trek has ventured into its more or less darkest moments, I know these aren't the darkest, but bear with me. Even on Voyager, there was still a fairly strong character focus throughout the majority of the show. There are certain episodes that you could point to, but I'm going to pull out my trump card. I really am. I'm going to pull out the trump card for this argument, and then I'm going to let this go. Threshold. Arguably the worst example of all of Star Trek ever was still character focused on Tom Paris. Now, it was bad. It was awful. It was horrible. It was disgusting. It was abysmal. It was, I could keep going here. But even Threshold kept to the Star Trek precepts. You follow me? Now I'm going to go ahead and finish all this up with my grandiose summary. Did I enjoy Into Darkness? Do I recommend Into Darkness? Is it net positive or net negative? Honestly, at the end of the day, everything considered, including the spoilers, which I'm not getting into just yet, I do believe that Into Darkness is net positive, in all honesty. I do believe it was still an enjoyable movie. I believe that it was still it was still worth the price of admission, so to speak. And I do still recommend it to people who still want to watch it. Now, I am going into spoiler territory. Attention! 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 I am getting into spoilers. I am going to be talking about spoilers as a concept before I actually mention any spoilers, so you've got like a minute or two in case you're away from the computer and left it on. I actually know a couple people who do this, or for whatever reason you need some time to stop the video. But anybody who does not want me to spoil this movie, you now have about a minute to go ahead and stop viewing this. One of the major problems with a movie that banks on spoilers is that you walk into the movie thinking that there's a twist. Now, that may sound like a duh, but that is, in my opinion, a detriment to a movie, to a game, to a book, to a TV show. Basically, you name it. For any work of medium of fiction, when you are warned in advance, oh, wait till you see this twist, or if you are warned, oh, I can't tell you about blah movie because spoilers, part of your brain automatically starts working on that problem and starts saying, oh, so while you're watching that movie, playing that game, reading that book, you're watching for the spoiler, you're watching for the twist. A twist, in my opinion, creatively and professionally, is not as impacting, cannot be as impacting if you know it's coming. Any marketing campaign that revolves itself around that, oh my god, wait till you see the M. Night Shyamalan thing in this one, is basically an automatic failure. Now, it may not be a complete and total failure, again, net positive for this movie, but the mere fact that they went to such ridiculous efforts in order to try and emphasize that there's this big twist, there's this big mystery box. That's what J.J. Abrams calls this, the mystery box. The big mystery box of this movie just kind of detracts from it, in my opinion, in my creative, professional opinion. When you say, oh my gosh, there's spoilers, there's nothing for it. This is the primary reason I sincerely had to debate whether or not I even put my no spoilers warning on this video. Because I am contributing to the problem here of this movie. I am contributing to the fact that people are going to go into it expecting a twist. So I am sorry, but I felt it was better to err on the side of caution, and there are plenty of people, I'm sure, who do still want to enjoy it and can still enjoy it, even knowing that there's some kind of twists, some spoilers that are coming in this movie. If I might use two examples really quick, though. Actually, I can't use one of them at all. So I'm not going to use a name of what the movie is, or anything about it whatsoever. However, there is a movie that I went in to see that I did not know there was a spoiler for. I'm not even going to tell you when this was. But I was going into this movie to see this movie without knowledge that there were spoilers in it, that there was a twist in it. No idea. There was no marketing about it. There was no adverting about it. There was nothing. I mean, obviously, I avoided learning about the plot of the movie. Duh. Because, again, duh. But that's it. There was no, I don't have to shun all news about this movie forever because, oh god, spoilers. No, it was just, alright, I'm going to go see this movie. And I was like, oh my god, it actually caught me. It genuinely caught me when it hit, and I was just like, holy crap. And that increased my enjoyment of the movie considerably. I'm going to name another example that I don't feel bad about naming. This is a slightly older movie called The Matrix. I've actually mentioned this before. I walked into The Matrix not expecting a twist. I walked in there expecting a sci-fi thing, action movie basically, with people with superpowers. That's basically what my impression was walking in. When they revealed what The Matrix was, my reaction was basically, whoa. No, I'm sorry, I'm kidding, of course. But you get my point. My enjoyment of that movie was enhanced by the fact that I didn't know there were spoilers or twists or whatever walking into it. I actually got another one for you. And I know you're going to laugh at me, but bear with me. The Sixth Sense, okay? Now, this is kind of a unique example, but when The Sixth Sense came out, nobody knew there was a twist in it. It was all advertised, it was all presented as, Bruce Willis is a psychologist, child psychologist. He's dealing with a kid who claims he sees ghosts. That was the full extent of what people were seeing going into that movie, and then, oh my god, twist right at the end, right? Now, I say this is a dual example because within about a day of the movie coming out, the marketing hype about the twist went through the roof. And then everybody was about the twist. And then, the next, 80 bajillion people who went to see the movie went in expecting a twist. So it is literally an example of both concepts. But when it first came out, the reason that twist exploded like that, the reason why it was so popular initially, the reason why it just went everywhere. The reason why that's still a part of our popular culture and the kind of thing that we will reference is because it was properly marketed. It was properly approached. Nobody walked into that thinking, oh my god, I can't wait to figure out what the twist is. No, initially, it was just another movie. And then twist! Now, obviously, if you aren't getting where I'm going with this, Into Darkness's biggest problem, literally the single greatest flaw of this movie, in my opinion, is the fact that they kept emphasizing this damn twist. For those of you who still don't want spoilers or don't want the twists, spoiled, you have officially run out of time. I have rambled on for like another 3 minutes here. He's Khan. Cumberbatch, John Harrison, whatever you want to call him, is actually Khan Noonien Singh. There, got it off my chest. I've been trying really hard not to say that for the last 28 minutes now. I was actually really worried I would. Whew, okay. That's the twist, right? Now, for those of you who have decided to watch this, who have not decided to watch the movie, who have any interest in the movie whatsoever, I mean, there's a very specific band of people who are watching this, who are probably like the people who don't care about spoilers, but did want to know the spoiler and did want to hear my opinion on it, who could have this reaction. But I bet those people, the reaction is probably, well, duh. And that's why it's the biggest flaw. Now, let me back up a little bit here. When everyone announced that there was going to be a second Star Trek movie, about 100% of everybody said, oh god, it's going to be the movie with Khan. Everybody said that. It was everyone's initial reaction. Everyone's initial reaction. Unfortunately, J.J. Abrams is... I have a generally low opinion of Abrams as a director, I'll be blunt. But I will give him credit it being really good at marketing, all things considered. And I know this is a comment that's been heard before, and I don't care. But that is my genuine opinion on the matter. Cloverfield is actually a pretty good example of him marketing basically the exact same kind of situation, actually. Everyone knew it's this big monster movie, right? But then the marketing campaign went everywhere. And there was all this, oh, what's going on? Oh my god, maybe, and the Voltron thing. Anyone remember the Voltron thing? No, it's just a movie about a monster. So yeah, the fact that it's Khan is just kind of a duh when it comes down to it. We all expected it to be Khan, but he spent the last however long hyping up the fact that we don't know who John Harrison is. In fact, when they finally revealed his name, it was like, John Harrison? Because a lot of people were like, oh, it's going to be Gary Mitchell. Oh, it's going to be, you know, I don't remember the other popular theory. Gary Mitchell was an extremely popular theory. I myself actually believed that for quite a while. But then we hear this John Harrison. Who the hell is John Harrison? And then they just kind of kept going it over and over. And it got to the point where several of us, and I freely lump myself into this category, were firmly convinced that it wasn't Khan. That was loud. Anyways, to give you my personal theory, and you can decide whether or not this sucks or is good or is awful or is whatever. I had reached the point where my theory was that the super ship that we saw in the evil Enterprise that we saw in the previews was actually a form of time ship with the Federation Time Division from the future, and that John Harrison was an agent who was also a member of Section 31 who was involved with that time ship, and he and several of its crew had basically reached the conclusion that this particular timeline, the rebooted, well, I can't even call it rebooted because it's just a different timeline, but whatever, you get the point, that the Abrams timeline didn't deserve to exist, and so that Harrison and his crew had come back in order to basically self-destruct, cancel, or revert all the changes that resulted in this timeline happening, and that would be the conflict that they would be trying to. That they had. You get the point here. I don't actually have a lot of details right now. I had worked them out at one point, and I'm afraid my memory is failing me right now. But that was my overall theory, and I knew several people who were like, "Yeah, that sounds really cool," and I was pretty much convinced, And then no, it's Khan. The biggest problem here. The second biggest problem. I've already mentioned the biggest problem. When you walk in knowing there's going to be spoilers, duh, right? However, and I've already admitted this movie was spoiled for me. I already knew it was Khan walking into it. I'm still pissed about that, but I'm going to move on. I'm not pissed at the person, if you happen to be watching this, because I know you happen to watch my videos, but I am still upset about that fact. And, frankly, that's a pretty good example of why my war on spoilers exists, is because it literally only takes a glance at a line of text for 1 second for an entire movie to be ruined. However, even not knowing that, walking into this movie knowing, oh my god, what's the big twist? If I had reached the moment and hadn't known it, I will be completely frank, I would have felt let down. Because it's just like, oh, it's Khan. Well, duh. I mean, really, that's just kind of the first reaction there. Now, my war on I mentioned I was going to talk about this later. My war on spoilers really does come down to... I'm going to segue for just a second, then I'm going to bring this back to the problem with spoiler-based marketing, okay? My war against spoilers really does come down to the two basic things, which really kind of tie into one thing. Choice. That's the one thing. It is my opinion that every individual should have the choice of whether or not they want spoilers or not. Period. The end. Every individual should have the decision of, well, I don't want to know what happens in this movie until I watch it. Or, well, I want to know what happens in this movie so I know if I want to watch it. Or, well, I want to know what happens in the movie because I don't care. Or, well, I want to know what happens in the movie because I don't want to watch it. Or, whatever. It doesn't matter. You should have the right to that choice. When someone spoils something for you, that choice is ripped from you. You no longer have that choice. You cannot get that choice back. You understand? It is lost, it is gone, it is dead. A friend of mine watched a movie recently. This was actually a bit ago. That was spoiled for her. I will not mention the movie, or the spoiler, or even the person. Like I said, this was a bit ago. It was spoiled because someone said, hang on. Four words on a chat channel she happened to be browsing. She happened to be chatting with her friends. Someone just popped into the channel, some random troll popped into the channel and said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 words. Movie was completely ruined for her. Now, let me make this clear. When I say ruined, I do need to qualify this. The overall enjoyment of the movie was lessened to the point of stupidity. She still enjoyed the movie. She will probably go see the movie again at some point, when it comes out on DVD or whatever. But the mere fact that that was spoiled for her significantly lessened her enjoyment of the movie because she knew it was coming. All it takes is 4 words. In the case of this movie, all it would take is one, the word con. If anybody was to see that word and to think about it for 3 seconds with regards to spoilers for this movie, they would put 2 and 2 together within a matter, like I said, within a second. Boom. Got it. Spoiled. Done. It is my opinion that that is criminal, rude, unpleasant, unacceptable, and unforgivable. If it is done intentionally, I do have to add that. If you do it unintentionally or from ignorance, well then you still got issues, but I'm not going to hate you forever for it. But this is my point about why it is a war on spoilers, rather than just, no spoilers guys. I do have to take such a hard-line stance because it is not only something that is so incredibly easy to do, it is something that is impossible to undo. Now, let's wrap this all back up here. When you have an entire marketing campaign, and indeed an entire movie pitch, centered around a spoiler, that better be an awesome spoiler, is really what I'm getting down to here. This is, like I said, this is basically the single biggest flaw of the movie. I'm finally really wrapping this point up. The fact that it's con is not a big twist. It is not a big spoiler. I'm sorry, it isn't. You know, obviously, I am regretful that it was ruined for me. I am a little irritated that it was, but when, at the end of the day, being honest with myself, like I said, my first reaction is, well, duh, of course it's con. That is not the kind of twist you want to market. You want to market the kind of twist like the fact that, you know, it's his sled, okay? And I'm only going to say that because, by the way, the reason I keep using the sled thing is nobody cares about that anymore. And just enough people can recognize the reference to at least get a vague idea of what I'm talking about. So that's kind of why I do that. I could use a slightly more recent, you know, oh my god, it was spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. But I like to use it was his sled because nobody cares. That's about the most unspoilery spoiler I could give. Anyways, moving on. It was his sled. That's the kind of twist we want. Or several other twists that I actually am not going to mention here because of what I just said. If you're going to have that kind of a thing, you have to make it significant. You don't have to make it, oh, okay. Or, and this is really my ultimate point here, don't market it around a twist. Forgive me for raising my voice, but seriously, there is no need, purpose, or point in marketing this twist. They could have just said right off the bat, it's the movie with Khan. This is the Star Trek II, Khan. Into Darkness, Khan. They could have just made it like that. They could have just said, yes, Cumberbatch, I can't even think of the full actor's full name. I should look that up, because I keep mentioning him, and I'm going to mention him later, too. Star Trek Into Darkness. Isn't it Benedict Cumberbatch, I believe? Something like that? I don't know. Anyways, yeah, Benedict Cumberbatch. I am actually saying that right. Yay! Benedict Cumberbatch as Khan. You know, they should have literally just done that. That is my frank opinion, right from the beginning. Don't do this whole mystery box thing. Don't do this whole build up to some kind of twist. There is no twist. There is no big thing. All you've done is made an artificial expectation of a big twist in the movie, and furthermore, and indeed worse, you've made it a lot harder for people like me, and people, Trekkers in general, to discuss this movie with people, in general, actually. For example, if that was not a big twist, if everybody knew he was Khan, I wouldn't even need to put my spoiler thing on the beginning of this. I would not have had to do my whole, here's my spoiler talk. I would have been able to cut about 10 minutes out of this video because guess what? It wouldn't be necessary. There would not be people who are avoiding forums, avoiding message boards, avoiding IMDb, avoiding Wikipedia. People have been dodging spoilers left and right about this movie because it's been well advertised there's a spoiler. And that is not conductive to a medium of conversation, a medium of discussion about a movie. Literally, you cannot discuss this movie properly, in my opinion, without discussing Khan. And that is the single biggest flaw of this entire movie, is the fact that the big twist meant nothing, changed nothing, did nothing, was not a big twist, and is a detriment to the movie, literally in a meta sense. Now I'm going to get a drink here, and then we're going to move on for a second. I want you to picture something. I believe Paramount owns the movie rights to Star Trek right now. I'm not 100% on that. I know it's not CBS. Screw them. I want you to imagine I'm walking into Paramount or whoever, and they're like, "What's up?" And I'm like, "All right, I got a pitch, new Star Trek movie." And they're like, "All right, we're listening." And I say, "Okay, 3 points. Number one, the crew has become adjusted to each other, seasoned. They are used to each other. There is a camaraderie there. There is a chemistry there. You know, blah 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 blah. Characterization." They go, "Okay, okay." And I'm like, "All right, next pitch point, bullet point 2, moral ambiguity, the concept of gray areas." The idea that for some people there's a line that shouldn't be crossed. The idea that there is some political infrastructure and interaction, even within the Federation and especially within Starfleet, that needs to be discussed, that needs to be brought into light, that needs to be debated as, and indeed, not as a bad thing, but as whether or not it is a good or a bad thing, or neither. Okay, I'm with you. And then the third point is just the word con. The reason I'm saying this like this is, in my frank opinion, if you came to me with a movie pitch with those 3 bullet points, my response would be, where do I sign? All 3 of those points... Sorry, I shouldn't do that. That's probably loud. All 3 of those points, to me, sound like potential incarnate. That sounds like the makings of a masterpiece movie right there. Let us be frank for just one moment. Any movie trying to compare itself to The Wrath of Khan has officially failed right off the get-go. You know, there's nothing for that. Whoops. I can't type today. There we go. However, even if you... I don't know, I'm trying to think of how to actually put this, but my point overall here is that even if you look at this as a competitive... that hurts my neck. Even if you look at it as competitive against Star Trek 2, which I actually don't, the mere potential of the kind of character Khan really is and was really does just add a great deal of potential dimension to a movie. Especially a movie. Khan has always been a movie-appropriate character. There's a reason they did a movie about him when they brought him back. There's a reason they brought back the same actor, for God's sakes. Because he was potential incarnate. And, oh, forgive me. What's his name? I should know his name. Give me a moment. Nicholas Meyer. Nicholas Meyer and Harve Bennett, I believe. Yes, I'm looking it up right now. Harve Bennett and Nicholas Meyer, both... I'm bad with names, you know this. Both looked at the Khan story, both looked at Space Seed in the original series and said, that is practically custom-made for a sequel. And it was custom-made for a sequel, not because of the overall plot, not because of the augments, not because of anything except for the word Khan, because he was just that interesting and dynamic of a character. Now, by the way, I know at least somebody is expecting me to comment on this. I'm not going to. Ricardo Montalban, forgive me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. I actually have a great deal of respect for the man. Is a Mexican. He is an excellent Mexican actor. He did a beautiful job of Khan. Benedict Cumberbatch is English. That doesn't bother me. I really don't care. I just wanted to get that out there. Okay, moving on. You know what? I'm actually gonna leave Khan for later. I kind of want to talk about that last. All right, let's leave Khan simmering for now. That's what he does best on SETI Alpha 5 or 6 or whichever one it was. Let's go back to some of the things I just mentioned. The crew. Okay, I'm putting this in the spoiler section because I'm actually going to mention specific scenes to really get my point across. I mentioned before the idea that there was this overarching theme of crew and family that really didn't actually go anywhere. It was kind of poorly done. However, there were several scenes where it very, very powerfully came through, and my favorite one is when Kirk is begging Admiral Marcus, to spare his crew. That was a very powerful moment. It was very well written. It was very well performed. He really it was probably Chris Pine's best scene in the whole movie, in my opinion. He really poured himself into that. He was just, yes, God, please, I will do anything. I'll give you them. I will give you my people, just spare my crew. I will take full 100% responsibility for this. Kill me right on the spot, I don't care. Brilliantly done. Brilliantly done. There's another Chris Pine excellent moment not too far after this when he's going to team up with Khan to board the enemy vessel. And Spock, I'll get to this in just a second, well, you know what, okay, whatever. Kirk turns to Spock and says, I need to do this because it's what I can do. I don't know what's right. I don't know what's best. You do. You're the person who knows what's best for this ship. Me? I need to go do what I can do because that's me. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that as Kirk. I've actually, well, okay, no, I haven't because I never actually did that video. But anyways, long story short, I think Chris Pine is kind of a subpar Kirk. I'll just say that flat out. However, that was a very good scene, and that was very impacting, and it was an excellent way to introduce the chemistry and dichotomy that should have been there throughout the whole movie between Kirk and Spock. Very well done, very well done. I'm not going to go do every single awesome moment. There are several awesome moments in this movie, but I want to cover one other one. Actually, two. I'm sorry, two other ones. These are both Spock ones, by the way. One with Spock. He, like I was just in the scene immediately preceding the one I was just talking about. He gets into the turbolift with Kirk, not summoned, by the way. He just gets into the turbolift with him and says, I must protest. Kirk looks at him weird and says, I haven't said anything yet. Spock then immediately lays out his entire plan because he's deduced it based off of flat logic and why he thinks it's incredibly stupid. Now, that is just so Spock that just made me grin. And the way the guy who plays Spock, I'm sorry, I don't know his name, portrayed it really was excellent. Again, excellent moment. The next one for Spock is actually not for that guy. It's for Leonard Nimoy. Yes, Leonard Nimoy is in the movie. This is technically another spoiler, a much smaller one. But there was a lot of question as to whether or not any of the old actors would be in this. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Michael Dorn was slated to be in this. Not playing Worf, playing one of his ancestors or someone else like that. But anyways, moving on. Leonard Nimoy does play Spock Prime, Elder Spock. And there is a scene where young Spock contacts old Spock, and he basically says, have you ever encountered a man named Khan? Old Spock immediately then says, I told you I would not tell you anything about the future to alter your destiny or the way you go through your life, etc., etc., etc. And there's about a 1-second pause, and then he says, I'm going to tell you everything I know about Khan. That's not how he says it. He says it perfectly. He accurately portrays someone who properly puts the gravitas behind the character Khan should be. Like I said, I'll talk about Khan later. He accurately portrays why Khan was the original series villain. I'm going to derail for just a second, but that is the scene. I'm basically done. Brilliant scene. And one of the reasons it's so brilliant is the topic I'm about to get into. In the Next Generation, we had basically the Borg. For a period of time, we had the Cardassians. For a period of time, we had the Romulans. We had the Duras. We had several major villain figures who were recurring and large-scale, right? Deep Space Nine, obvious. We had the Founders, segregate from the Dominion, and, of course, the Cardassians for the early part of the show, etc., 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 right? Even in Voyager, we had several recurring villains. The Kazon. I can't say that with enough dryness in my throat. Anyways, the Kazon. We had the Hirogen. We had the Borg, even though they were kind of hampered. But whatever, we're not really getting into that. My point is, even the Enterprise actually had several recurring villains. Most of the series had recurring villains or villain groups. The original series was one of the only ones that really didn't, and that extends into the movies as well. With one very strong exception. When most people, myself included, and I've asked several fellow Trekkers and Trekkies about this, think about the villain for the original series, counting the movies, the words that come to their mouth are Khan Noonien Singh, because he was the villain for the Kirk era. Really, he was. One of the reasons Khan was so effective was because he was the mirror hero. I don't have a proper term for this, forgive me. Saren in Mass Effect is a brilliant, more modern example of what I'm talking about. The villain is the hero. He is just as competent. He is just as strong. He is just as intelligent. He is just as capable. He is just as successful. He, she, doesn't matter. In all intents and purposes, this character is the duplicate, the mirror, whatever you want to call it, of the hero, of you, the main character, whatever you want to call that. Khan was the anti-Kirk, and Kirk and Khan were the perfect foils for each other. That's one of the reasons they brought him back. And he wasn't just a "I'm going to kill you now, twirl my mustache" kind of villain. There were layers there. There was complexity. There was a degree of depth. Now, let me make this clear. He was still very clearly a villain. Khan was never a sympathetic villain. He was never a Type 2. He was always a Type 1. Classic villain. Traditional villain. Still charismatic. Still enjoyable. Still someone you cheer every time they walk onto the stage. Still someone who has more than just twirling the mustache, still someone who has layers, has complexity, has depth, but not sympathetic. That's kind of important, actually. I'll get into that. Like I said, I really kind of want to leave Khan for last. I apologize for talking about him even more. But that is one of the reasons that scene had such impact with Elder Spock. That's one of the reasons that was such an awesome scene. Elder Spock is probably the individual who most gets across the gravitas of who Khan is and why he is such a threat. Now let's leave him aside. Let's talk about Admiral Marcus. Now, it's funny because I just finished talking about twirling the mustache. That is about as twirly mustache, stupid, pointless, pedantic, poorly written, poorly executed, poorly everything except acted villain I've ever seen. That's okay. Okay, that's a total lie. I've seen worse. But you might as well have just called him Admiral Evil. You might as well just have smacked a big label, a big neon glowing sign over his head that said, "By the way, I'm evil." No depth, no complexity, no layers. In my qualification of the 4 types of villain, or 8 if you want to get technical, the 4 types of villain, he doesn't even qualify as any of the 4 types, because he isn't a villain. He's a cardboard cutout that happens to exist so the plot can move here and there. That is not a villain. That's a set piece. That's a frickin' prop. That's all Admiral Marcus was, and not only am I disappointed by this because the actor whose name unfortunately I cannot think of really did try to do something with his role. Like I said earlier, of all the things I disliked about Admiral Marcus, acting was not the thing. He actually did try to do a decent job with his role. So props to that. Definite props. But there's only so much you can do when you're handed a script like that and just said, "Alright, here you are, be obviously evil." Okay, can I add any nuances to my character? No. Can I do anything at all? No. Okay, obviously evil. You got it. Mwahaha! And now I will tie this girl to the railroad track because my name's Snidely Whiplash. Yeah, really, it was just embarrassing. Awkwardly, badly embarrassing. Let me say really quick that one of the other reasons this bothers me, because this bothers me just on the face of it, as I just mentioned. Excuse me. But it also bothers me because, as I mentioned, moral ambiguity earlier. Remember that was bullet point 2 I was talking about? Would it not have been excellent if this was a character far more like Sloane? Those of you who do not know who Sloane is, it would take some time to properly explain. Synopsis: he was a gray character in Starfleet. I have heard some people say he's evil. I've heard some people say he's good. I've heard some people say he's gray. The mere fact that people still debate the Sloane character to this day, in my opinion, is a sign of the success of the character. He was complicated. He was brilliantly acted. The actor who does him, he's one of those guys. He doesn't really do major roles, but every time he does do a role, he's fantastic. Brilliant job of acting it. Brilliant lines. Brilliant setup. Sloane-type character would have been fantastic for this. Why not have a genuinely ambiguous character? Why not have someone who has some complexity to them, has some depth to them, who actually has motivations for what they're doing, who genuinely believes they're doing the right thing, who actually is torn about engaging in horrible acts? because they don't want to engage in horrible acts. They just believe that sometimes the ends justify the means. Why not have, I've mentioned this earlier, why not have, I'm sorry, I mentioned this earlier in my stream, I do apologize, an actual observation of the dynamic and gradient question of where is the line? At what point do the ends no longer justify the means? Why not have this character be that dynamic, be that gradient, be that gray, and then put Khan in contrast to that? What we get instead is almost the exact opposite. They make several attempts, I'm going to finally start talking about Khan, they make several attempts to make Khan look sympathetic. They make several attempts to make him look like he's the victim. I have heard it argued that that is Khan, the character, playing up the situation, but I disagree completely because the way the scenes are portrayed, the directing style, the music, and the acting of the characters involved, in my opinion, is aimed at the audience, not an in-universe thing aimed at the characters. That is an attempt to make Khan more sympathetic to us, the viewers. I think that was a huge mistake. And I think it would have been far more interesting to have Khan as his classic Type 1 villain, make Marcus the far more complicated Type 2 villain, and then portray the two off of each other within the movie, rather than what they did. Now we're going to leave Marcus alone, because frankly I don't even have anything else to say about him. You know, Snidely Whiplash, mustache twirl. Moving on. Khan. First and foremost, let me get this out there. If I have not mentioned this before, I do apologize. Benedict Cumberbatch did a brilliant job, okay? He really did. He's a great actor, and he was a great actor as Khan, the end. I'm sorry, I don't actually have anything to add to that. My biggest problem with Khan is a complaint I have heard before, so forgive me for the repetition, is that he's not Khan. He is not a character at all. He bounces around characterization. He changes his portrayal of who it is we are seeing as a character, alters based on the needs of the given scene. And again, I know this can be argued, but it is my opinion that this is, again, deliberate, intentional choice, that rather than using Khan as a character, as an individual, as a true apex of the plot, he literally services whatever is necessary for any given scene. He needs to be sympathetic in this scene. He needs to be awesome in this scene. He needs to be terrifying in this scene. He needs to be psychotically, stupidly evil in this scene, etc., etc., etc. He is never portrayed consistently, and more importantly, every time his portrayal is changed, it is obviously done for the benefit of the scene it is being done in, not for any attempt to add any level of complexity to the character, or the story, or the plot, or anything, just the scene. Now, first of all, that is a huge waste of Benedict Cumberbatch's talents, and second of all, that is a huge waste of the character Khan, and number three, that is a huge waste of our time. That is just plain unforgivable, in my opinion. That's like someone saying, okay, we want to do a movie about, you know what, I'm not actually going to name an individual. Individual B. It's going to be played by amazing actor A. Okay? Individual B is from fantastically popular series C. And individual A, is really a complex, diverse, interesting character that everybody loves, okay? And then we're going to use him as, and I already used this term, a prop. We are going to use him as a prop to stand up any given scene, rather than actually use him as individual A, played by amazing actor B from amazing series C. Now, that's the negative. As I already said, Cumberbatch does do an amazing job with what he's handed. However, I do have one other positive thing to say. Actually, you know what? I'm actually going to leave that last positive thing for very, very last, because it's kind of terrifying, and for some reason I want to end on that note. I mentioned quite recently in the stream, by the way, spoilers for KOTOR 2. If you care, you have about 10 seconds to not listen to this section. I'm literally just watching the timer here. These aren't even big spoilers, by the way, for KOTOR 2. It's just something that you may consider a spoiler. But 1, 2. Okay. There are three main villains within KOTOR 2. Kreia, Scion, and Nihilus, right? Kreia is the villain of KOTOR 2. That's the spoiler, by the way, for anyone who's curious. But one of the things that Obsidian did very, very well, they're excellent writers. I've said this before. They really do excellent writing. It's just their gameplay has issues. One of the things they did very well with Kreia was they didn't just characterize her by having her in your party for a huge chunk of the game and having her philosophies and her mentalities get across in her dialogue constantly, which they do as well, but they also decided to show you the two opposing extremes of Kreia. Scion, the man. Scion is just a man. There is nothing else there. No ambition, no long-term goals, no wanton, just nothing. He is just a person. All that is left is him, his pain, flailing about. Practically a beast, for all intents and purposes at that point. That is one opposing extreme of the failure of Kreia, and of Kreia as a character. The other end of this extreme is Nihilus, who is the exact opposite. He is not a man at all anymore. It has actually been debated that there is nothing under that mask. That's never been proven in actual canon, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, there is that he is as not a person as it gets. There is nothing there anymore except for a void. A total, empty, devoid space which just keeps going because it just keeps going. Again, no ambition, no plot, but on one hand, all that was left was the man, and on the other hand, all that was left was the void. You get me? And both of these were beautiful, excellent contrasts of each other to Kreia, to emphasize the Kreia character. One of the things they could have done, especially if they had used Marcus as a Sloane-type character, is used him and Carol Marcus, the woman involved, as not in the exact same way, but as ways to contrast the differing viewpoints of Starfleet and the differing viewpoints of mankind at this point in time, without having to use the main characters, because we know what their views are going to be, and indeed they make that very clear throughout the show, or movie, sorry, in order to emphasize Khan. And then we could have had Khan in the middle, again, like Kreia, being himself. He has his own characterization, of course, but we get more of that character from the two sides of this. You get where I'm going with this? Now I'm going to kind of let that go, because I've already talked too long, and my throat's kind of hurting, and it's really, really hot. It's already been an hour. My God, I really didn't think it would be this long. Whatever, sorry, whatever. There is one scene I have to applaud in this movie, and I really want to make this clear to anybody. If anybody out there doesn't want to hear this because this is kind of horrible, I understand. But this was perfect. Now, anybody out there knows I don't like squick, I don't like gore, I don't like horror. Part of the reason for that is of real-life reasons, right? That's all I'm saying. That is literally all I'm saying. I have an understanding, and in all honesty, most people do. Let's not try and lift myself up here. Most people understand that there is a difference between being willing to kill and not willing to kill. Most people don't understand what kind of a choice that is until it is upon them. They cannot imagine it. They cannot envision it. Most people, especially people who are willing to be honest about this, will say, are you willing to kill? Their response will be, I don't know. I've never faced that choice. I don't know what that's like. In my personal experience, the vast majority of human beings, and you're going to laugh at me for this, are not willing to kill. That is an experience, my experience, in interacting with many, 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 many thousands of people over my life. You may call me naive, stupid, or whatever. I really don't care. But I'm going to stand by that statement, okay? Now, I'm just kind of building up to the point here, so forgive me. Being willing to kill is stepping over a line. However, now we got to get a little more gradient. Picture killing someone with a gun. Okay, that probably sounds horrible, and that's because it is. Okay, take a step back. What if you're killing someone you don't even see? They're in a vehicle, a
building, something like that. They're a number on a screen. Maybe you're in a facility or a ship, something like that, right? Very few people who are honest with themselves will be able to say that it is not easier to kill a number than a face. Now let's take it in the other direction. Killing someone with your bare hands. Just speaking from basic biology, math, and physics, is horrible, brutal, bloody, messy, violent, terrible, and traumatizing. The willingness to kill someone with your bare hands is a truly horrific thing. I'm just saying that flat out. I'm not even going to say that's my opinion. There is a scene in this movie where Khan has Khan and Kirk and Carol. Well, okay, Carol was already there. Khan and Kirk have stormed the bridge. Khan seals everything off, takes out Kirk, does so very, very well done, by the way. This whole scene, I'm praising this scene for reasons I'll get into, but this whole scene really did fit beautifully. He takes out Kirk, doesn't kill him, very intentionally does not kill him, just disables him. It's only like 5 seconds. Bam, 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 kick, bam, stamp, walks by, breaks Carol's foot with literally one maneuver. Both of these things are perfectly in going with what I'm going to summarize all this with. And then he goes up to Admiral Marcus, grabs him by his head, and crushes his skull with his bare hands. Think about this. Genuinely think about this. Was Admiral Marcus a threat to him? No. Not at that point, especially. Was Admiral Marcus someone who he despised? Well, yeah. But more importantly than anything else, this ties into who Khan is. This is why Khan is not a sympathetic villain. This is why Khan is a classic, dynamic, Type 1 villain. Khan is the kind of person who is willing to kill someone with his bare hands, and not only did so, but did so by deliberate choice. He could have grabbed any number of weapons and vaporized him. He could have shot him just dead, destabilized his heart. He could have snapped his neck. He could have done anything to kill that man. Anything, rather than grab him and crush his skull with his bare hands. One of the most horrific, brutal, terrifying ways to kill someone I can think of off the top of my head when it comes to bare hands. But he chose that, deliberately and intentionally. That scene is Khan, probably the most Khan scene in the entire movie, in my opinion. Savage, brilliant, strong, intelligent, and utterly unhesitating in every action he does. Once he makes a choice, he does it. Bam. That whole scene was perfect poetry in motion. Takes out Kirk. Bam. Done. Takes out Marcus. Bam. Done. Grabs the Admiral and says, all right. Crunch. And the way Cumberbatch portrays this is perfect. The line is kind of sad and pathetic, actually. I believe it's, "You should have let me sleep." It's so unmemorable, I don't actually even remember it. But that was just perfect. And I hate myself for saying this, because it was horrifying, but that's kind of my point. That really was Khan. And I wish we'd seen more of that. Not the head crushing. I don't want to see more of that. But you get my point. I wish we'd seen more of the calculating, brutal, savage villain that Khan really is. He mentioned this earlier when he's in Brig. He's talking to Spock, and Spock says he wanted your intellect, and his response is, no, he wanted my savagery. He wanted my brutality. You may have all the intellect in the world in knowing how to break a bone, but you won't actually do it, or something like that. He says it brilliantly. That's Khan, right there. That was very well portrayed. And I just wanted to end it on a high note there. High note. No, I'm actually totally lying. The spoiler alert! There's a scene in this movie, in Star Trek II, insert the quote-unquotes, also known as Star Trek 12, in a movie about Khan, where somebody has to go and get severe radiation sickness and poisoning in order to repair the ship so that the Enterprise isn't destroyed. I could go into more detail about this scene. Unfortunately, the more detail I go into this scene, the more the comparisons to Spock's actions in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan are going to be. Almost all of the negative I have heard about this movie has come from this one scene. I have heard overall positive reviews about this movie. My review about this movie is overall positive. This scene was stupid. This scene was unnecessary, pointless, drivel. Okay? I'm sorry. I hate to put my opinion down, and I'm going to say opinion. I hate to put my opinion down so bluntly. There is a huge difference between an homage and trying to be an homage. When someone... Okay. I have a friend named Sandra. She does not get a lot of gaming things. And if I were to go to her and start talking to her about Mega Man, if she is not the kind of person to do this. I'm just using her as an example. She is the kind of person, if she was to try and relate, she was trying to pretend that she's big into Mega Man, it would come off as worse than if she hadn't tried at all. You understand what I mean? If I'm trying to get a point across here, forgive me for my analogy. To speak more bluntly, it is very clear and obvious that this was not an homage, that this scene was done by people who are not people who get the Star Trek II, who do not get Star Trek at all. That was one of the first things I talked about, the misuse of Star Trek precepts, the not being Star Trek. It is very clear that the people who wrote this movie don't get Star Trek. And you know what? That might have been fine if they'd admitted it. But the fact that they tried made it worse, in my opinion. And this scene was the pinnacle of that. And I honestly don't have anything else to say about that. I hate to end on a low note like that. So I'm actually not going to. Spoiler alert times 2! I do have one last thing to say about this movie. I recommend you go see it. I know. I've been talking bad about it for quite a while now. Like 30, 40 minutes of this video has been after the spoiler point when I've just basically been saying blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, in all honesty, I enjoyed this movie. One of the reasons I have spoken so ill about it is not because I hate it. It is not because I did loathe it and encourage you not to watch it. It is because at the end of the day, I am disappointed by it. This movie had potential, obvious and on display, to be superior, to really be an excellent movie, and I am discouraged because it was not. But do not take that as anything other than simple, concise admonishment. Okay, concise is probably a bad word for this. Let's go with critical admonishment. There we go. I like that better. It is still an enjoyable movie. It is still a good movie. Honest. And I still recommend you watch it. If you've gotten all the way to this point and you've learned all these spoilers, I still genuinely recommend you go and watch it. Just go in prepared. And remember... God! Okay, I can't do it. Damn it, I really wanted to. I'm sorry, guys. My throat's still hurting. I'll talk to you guys later.